right. I think we are live as my voice cracks. I think we are live here. This is Nathan Holritz, host of the Bokeh podcast, CEO over at Photographers Edit. It is wonderful to have you here today. It's wonderful to be back here on our live stream at the Bokeh podcast. And yes, we are live streaming. So for those of you who are listening to the audio version after the fact, we usually publish the audio version about a week after. Just know that these are also live streams. So you can go to facebook.com/Bokeh podcast, Bokeh podcast, on Facebook and watch the replay of the live stream. There are going to be visual elements, certainly the interaction, the conversation. I'm pulling up websites, maybe sharing graphics or otherwise. There's going to be a visual element to the live stream that is, and maybe not necessarily better, but certainly a different experience than the audio. So make sure to come join us next time for our live streams. And by the way, we announced the upcoming live streams on Instagram at instagram.com/Bokeh podcast as well. Make sure you're following us there if you aren't already. Now, just very quickly, I want to highlight something that we have begun highlighting here over the last 2 or 3 episodes, and that is just an encouragement, really, for all of us, for those of you listening in, for us as a photography industry, to give back, to take advantage of an opportunity or opportunities to give back in some form or fashion. I know many of us running a business or maybe multiple businesses have limited time, but the reality is that there are different ways that we can give back. And this was highlighted, honestly, by my friend Sean Lee. I'm going to pop his image up here on the screen from episode 464. I had Sean on, and the privilege of having Sean on. Sean has really inspired me to think more about how I can think about making a difference through my business. I know this kind of looks funny right now. Actually, for those of you watching the live stream, it's my hands, Sean's face. That's kind of hilarious. But anyway, Sean, good friend, and ultimately an inspiring leader in our industry who is encouraging businesses to get involved in giving back, more specifically in community. For the time being, that was kind of an overwhelming concept for me because I feel like I'm juggling so much already. And I told Sean this. He was super encouraging and gracious. But where I have found that I can continue to give back, because this is an organization that I've been giving to for a number of years now, is with a company called, or an organization called Charity Water. And just very quickly before I introduce my guest for today, I want to highlight this company, and we'll just pull it up here on the screen, charitywater.org. Now, we don't have any direct tie to the company, the organization. I'm not involved in the organization. I just give to it. And this is one example of a company that you can give to, in some way find ways to give back. This is a company you can do that to very simply. And at the end of the day, it's interesting, as many needs and challenges and certainly important discussions that we're having politically or otherwise in our culture and around the world, the very root level, if we don't have clean drinking water, nothing else is relevant. And it's amazing, based on the stats that Charity Water shares, that it's about 750 million people that lack basic access to clean and safe drinking water. That's a mind-blowing concept. So anyway, I've been giving to this organization. I only highlight this here because I want to encourage you all listening in, watching live potentially, to also find a way to give back. And it's not about a lot of money. In fact, I told you all I would do this, continue to do this before each Bokeh podcast episode live stream, that I would give to Charity Water. You can see a receipt from my gift today. It's only $40, not a lot of money. $40 means that somebody gets clean drinking water. And it's those kinds of small things that we can do that, in this case, don't even take that much time, but that enable us to give back. I just want to encourage all of our community to look for ways to do that. And that's all. And shout out again to Sean Lee for being such an inspiration and really pushing me and encouraging me in that realm. All right. Enough of me rambling on my own. I want to introduce my guest for today, who has been super patient in the meantime as I'm rambling on. Madison Banks is here. Madison, thank you so much for making time to hang out with us. Actually come back for a second time to hang out with us.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I feel like since the last episode, there has been so many changes, and so I can't wait to talk about that. And you just kind of see, all the things that have changed, and what I've definitely learned from listening to myself over and over and over again from the original Bokeh podcast.
Okay.
That I did.
Well, and so I'm glad that you bring that up, because we'll just make note that for everybody listening in who didn't listen to the first interview with Madison, this was over a year ago, but episode 408, we actually published it in July. I think we actually recorded it a little bit before that.
Yeah.
But episode 408, we'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But Madison, you were super new. I mean, I guess really in the scheme of things, still relatively new to the industry, but you were super new at the time. You'd experienced a certain amount of success, and you were gracious enough to come and share how you got into that place in business. But as we all kind of learn as entrepreneurs, and I've been in it now for about 20 years, it's not always smooth sailing. And
No.
And really a lot of, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, how we handle those challenges, or in the context of today's conversation, something that we might label as a failure or a set of failures, has a big part to do with ultimately how successful we become as business owners, right?
Yes.
So you've been kind enough. You actually reached out to me, and just to break the fourth wall for everybody listening and watching, Madison reached out to me about a month or so ago, and she's like, hey, so much has happened since the last podcast. I'd love to come back and talk about really how failure is an opportunity to learn, and how I also am able to step beyond those who criticize me or naysayers in the end, and still create a business or run a business. So we're going to get into the details of that here. In fact, we should just jump right in because there's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
Are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready. Here we go.
Okay, so we're going to talk about failure. We're going to talk about dealing with criticism from outside. But outside of those two big ideas, what would you say is the biggest lesson? Like if you had the chance to, let's say I'm a brand new photographer, right? So talk to me like I'm a brand new photographer. If you were talking to a brand new photographer who's trying to get in business or is just starting, and they're like, I don't know which end is up, I'm trying to figure out how to make this thing work.
Yeah.
What would be the first piece of advice or the big idea that you've learned in the last year that you would want to share with that photographer?
Well, since when we published the last Bokeh podcast episode, there were a lot of listeners who private messaged me on Instagram telling me,
awesome,
how much they loved the episode and how much they learned from it, that they were in the same kind of position that I was in. I know I kind of put in there like, I want to work all the time. Like, when is this going to end that I just want to go all the time? And it ends.
It ended?
It ends.
Okay.
And you come to the point where you have to realize, and this is the number one thing that I would tell any new photographer, because, if you have a family, you have to put them first. And your family is the most important thing in your life. If you're married, your marriage is below your priority of God. Your marriage is, the second biggest priority, even above your children. And, if you're not going to if that doesn't work, then nothing else works and everything just crumbles to the ground. So I would always tell, a new business owner, thank God my husband has been so supportive in the beginning, because starting a business is hard, and alone being a photographer is hard. Creating something that you don't want to look like everybody, it's just difficult. And so I would say, you never want your pursuits to go in front of your marriage, your children, or anything else that's a part of your family. You definitely want that to come first, because those are the people that are going to be there for you no matter what. So that's what I would tell any new photographer, to put your family first, and to understand that they're your cheerleaders. They're the ones that are going to be there for you, your friends, your closest friends. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
I love it. This is very much a reflection of really what the Bokeh podcast is about, what Photographers Edit's about. I may have even said this to you at some point, Madison, but there are two big ideas that drive what I do as an entrepreneur. Why Photographers Edit matters to me, why the Bokeh podcast matters to me, why these other companies that I'm starting matter to me. It's two concepts. One is time, and the other is relationships.
Yes.
I know that we talk quite a bit on the podcast about the significance of efficiency, right? How to have a more efficient workflow. And that sounds super nerdy to some people. It's not a sexy topic, but the reality is, if we are more intentional and really intelligent about the way that we work, we maximize our efficiency. What that then does is it frees up time to do two things. One, certainly to focus on those things that actually grow our business. But at the end of the day, and to your point, it allows us to have the space to focus on relationships, which there's really little that can come in front of that, as you pointed out. So being intentional as business owners for the sake of maximizing time, not just so we can sit around on our butt and watch Netflix, but so that we can do things certainly that are helpful for our business. And yes,
Netflix
absolutely.
is good too.
Well, I was going to say, and to take a break too. That's important too, for sure. But then ultimately to devote to relationships, I could spend probably multiple hours just on that topic. It's so huge. And the last thing that we need to do is let our business drive away the opportunity to invest in those relationships. We can work really hard at the end of the day. We can have a strong work ethic. I mean, this is something that I've been especially kind of pushing even more for myself is to bring consistency to bear when it comes to even my work ethic. But we're not working forever. At the end of the day, what do we have left in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? We have relationships.
Exactly.
And just because you got to put 60, 80 hours a week and feel good about #hustle right now is going to have little bearing on those relationships in the end of the day. And that's where we do need to put our priorities. So anyway, I don't mean to ramble. Your point is well taken. It's a great point. We're going to keep moving though, because we do have a pretty kind of heavy couple of topics really to get into.
We do. we do.
Let's talk about, first of all, this concept of failure. And actually, you know what, before we do, I do want to highlight your Instagram account. So I'm going to pull this up here on the browser for everybody that might be watching. For those of you that are listening, you can go to Instagram, of course, Photography by Madison Banks, just like it sounds, Madison Banks. And see Madison's truly beautiful work here. I mean, it's a really lovely feed. And so make sure that you go check out Madison's work and you follow her there. And by the way, you can also go to Madison's website, which Madison, I think this is like a major upgrade since the last podcast episode. It's beautiful. Who did your site for you?
Yes, so The Amazing with Grace and Gold completely rebranded me. Oh man, and you look at that logo and you're like, who is this? Who is this? I know, it's so crazy when they sent me this logo like it's like a rainbow logo.
Yeah.
I was like, this is me. Oh my God, this is me. This is exactly what I'm just colorful. Like I don't have a certain color. I can't choose like yellow, pink, blue. What do I go with? So I just did all of them. And I feel like that's just kind of a representation of me and my personality. I'm not just one type of person. I'm just all these things all the time. So thanks. Yeah, I absolutely adore it. They did amazing.
I mean, it really is beautiful. And you make an interesting point, which is, the natural tendency, in fact, in design specifically, I think the recommendation traditionally anyway, is that you incorporate no more than 2 to 3 colors in the creation, for example, of a website, but certainly the creation of a brand logo, for example, or a word mark. And yet and I think what I'm seeing here is 4 colors, but they've managed to represent that variety, that color that you're talking about. And yet at the same time, it doesn't feel overwhelming. It's so well designed. It's actually pulling those colors that they're using for the brand itself. And for anybody who's listening right now, I'm actually on the website, we're scrolling, but even at the top of the page, the colors have been pulled into the image, or the other way around. The images reflect the colors of the brand. It's just beautifully done.
Thank you. I love it. I can't take any credit for it, but the photos, because with Grace and Gold, they took care of everything. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're incredible. They're incredible. I've never had such a great experience hiring someone to do something for me. Okay. They were amazing. I mean, incredible. So if you need a new website, just go ahead and look them up, book their highest package, and just go with it.
Wow, what a sale. Okay,
just go with it.
For everybody that's listening right now, I have pulled up the withgraceandgold.com website. And just to be clear, I don't know this brand or this company, or at least not closely. But based on Madison's recommendation, it sounds like a good way to go. So we'll link to this site here in the show notes. I mean, their site in and of itself speaks to their ability with design. It's beautifully, beautifully done. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, seriously, Madison, congrats on the beautiful website. Thanks. It looks really, really great. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening in. All right. So on to the topic at hand here. And by the way, we do have a comment from Chelsea. Chelsea says, love that logo, and agreed. I mean, it's beautifully done. So thanks for listening in, Chelsea, and commenting as well. And by the way, for everybody who is watching the live stream, part of the purpose of this live stream is for you to be able to actually have a conversation with us. Madison is so gracious to spend time with us. She's here to answer questions. If you have questions, don't hesitate to pop those in the comments. Yeah, ask them all. She's been super transparent and gracious. I want to know. All right, so let's go with this, Madison. So let's talk about failure, actually, first of all. When we talk about this concept of failure and experiencing failure, I'd love to define that word. Words are kind of an interesting thing. They mean different things to different people. Let's give context to the conversation at hand. When we're talking about failure, and we're actually titling this Failure, Free Tuition for the School of Business, what does that word failure actually mean to you?
Yeah, so failure is definitely something that's hard to talk about for anyone. And it's definitely hard for me to discuss. And we'll definitely talk about why I really wanted to talk about my failure today later on. But I just feel like, failure is something that you will have all of the time.
Mm.
And, whether it be big or whether it be small, you will fail over and over and over again. Um, you know, I have always defined a failure in two different ways.
Okay.
One being positive failure and one being negative failure. So, positive failure being when you make a mistake, but you don't let it overtake you or own you. You choose how you choose to take that failure and turn it into a positive thing that you do, whether it be
Yeah.
correcting that mistake or learning from that mistake is the biggest thing that makes it a positive failure. And then there's negative failure, and that's when you take the failure or the mistake that you've made and you completely let it own you. You shut down, shut down your business and you're done. And that's it. You just completely let it take over you. Now, obviously, all negative failure is not shut down your business failure,
Right. Sure.
but
Sure.
you can let it take over you and you can sit in that failure and let it eat you alive, which
Yep.
has happened to everyone.
hmm Where
So
we
that's
fixate on it,
how,
right? Like we
yeah.
let it, we
Hmm.
just sit there, like, literally, maybe in some cases, we're literally sitting and we're just fixating on that concept, and
Yeah.
we allow it to eat us up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you completely just let negative failure, if you just completely let failure own you, you're going to turn that into a negative form of failure, and it's not going to be good for anybody. I know that when I make a mistake, it's like it I have learned to how to reinforce that failure into positive failure. But when
Mm.
I didn't know how to do that, I was affecting my family. I was
Mm.
affecting my business.
hmm
I was affecting my future couples that had nothing to do with any of that whatsoever. So I think that's how I would kind of describe failure and how I would kind of separate positive and negative failure.
Okay, I love the differentiation that you make there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's important to. I mean, first of all, what that does is it acknowledges our ability to frame that experience, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
can determine whether this is something that's going to be debilitating and eat us up,
Mm-hmm.
or we can
Yep.
frame that in such a way that we look for the opportunity to learn, we make
Mm-hmm.
change, and then we continue to move forward. And I would venture that's probably what you did, but we're going to talk about that here in just a second. And just for
Mm-hmm.
context, I mean, I'm actually kind of curious about your perspective on this. I'm popping this up on the screen for anybody that's
Mm-hmm.
watching the video, but the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines failure, first of all, as omission of occurrence or performance. So
Mm-hmm.
failing to perform in some particular way,
Mm-hmm.
a state of inability to perform a normal function. We talked about that earlier, where we're allowing this so-called failure, this experience, to be debilitating in
Mm-hmm.
nature. Lack of success, a falling short. Do any of these
Mm-hmm.
terms kind of resonate with you or make sense in the
Yeah.
context of this conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, a million times yes. Like I said, there can be failures where they're huge, and maybe it's something that's going to completely just wreck you and ruin you. But I don't think that you have to let it. I don't think that you have to just sit in it. Everybody everybody on this planet Earth has made a mistake, whether it be big or small. And as a Christian, I take failure, sin, same thing. And no sin is greater than another. And so I always kind of take that into the failures as well. It's like, okay, this person fell big time, but they walked through it. They got through that failure. They turned it around. And I think that the more that you fail and the more that you show that you can turn that failure around, that's what defines you as a person and as a business owner completely.
Beautifully summed up. And so I actually want to give further context to the conversation before we talk
Mm-hmm.
about specifically, practically, how
Mm-hmm.
you kind of moved beyond those so-called failures. Let's further define what failure means to you. If you don't mind just sharing two or three examples of
Yeah.
these so-called failures that you experienced in the last year.
Yeah, so failure, obviously, like I said earlier, it's not something I love admitting. But I
Sure.
think that there are people out there that these things have happened to them and they think that they're the only ones. I know I did.
Fair.
When it
Yeah.
happened to me,
Sure.
I thought I'm the only person in the world that this has happened to.
Mm.
Like I'm gonna why me? Why does this happen to me? For example, very first wedding that one of my very first weddings that I ever got hired for. It was about 2 years ago. I got home, started editing, clicked the wrong button on the camera, and formatted the entire card. None of the images were culled. None of the images were edited. Nothing was on my computer. Now, thank God to people who are incredible. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Thank God to people who are incredible and know exactly what they're doing, because all those images were saved and they were sent to the couple. So, that was really great. But thanks to that happening, I did not have a correct post-processing system. I did not know what I was doing. I was not educated. I had no reason even taking on that wedding or being a part of that person's special day. Now they don't know that this happened because they got all of their images and they were beautiful. But this happened to me, and I felt like I was dying on the inside. I don't know if this has happened to anybody. It's obviously happened to other people, but I was dying on the inside. I didn't know what to do. I sent the card off. All the cards were back, and they were all good, and all the images were back on the card. But now I think I'm kind of like a technology, like, obviously besides headphones, I'm not very good at headphones, but technology wise, post-processing wise, I think I've nailed down a post-processing system very, very well. But I would not have been able to do that if that had not happened to me. And so that's kind of why I always say, the topic of this episode, failure is like free tuition. It's when you fail, you learn from it, or you could choose not to learn from it. But in my case, learn from it, knew exactly how to correct it. I took a class, or not a class, but learned from a few people, what can I do to correct this post-processing system? And I corrected it. And now it's like, go, 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 go. After a wedding, everything's good. It's always the same thing over and over and over again.
I think we lost her. We're going to wait just a second and see if...
There we go. Sorry.
Are you back, Madison?
I'm back. See, this is why I'm not good at technology. Don't listen to me.
All right.
Don't listen to me.
You're back online. Now, I will say there's a little bit of a delay at the moment.
Okay.
So what I might do is if you can hang up from the call and just call back in, I'll let you back in. And I think we'll be able to get lined back up again. Does that work for you?
Perfect. Yeah, sorry.
All right. No worries.
Awesome.
So this is really, first of all, super gracious of Madison to come on the show like this and be willing to admit shortcomings. But I hear what she's saying, and there's something that very much I can relate to in this regard. Oh, she's calling back in. Let's see. We're going to let her back in. Let's see if we can get back to the split screen. There we go. All right, we're back. All right, cool. Audio is synced and everything. We're good to go.
I got it fixed. Nothing's going to fall again, I swear.
Okay. No worries. So we're going to keep going, though.
Failure.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. Before we keep, because I'd love to get one or two more examples from you of just individual failures or so-called failures you've experienced. But failure is such a strong word, too. And that's part of the reason I was asking about the definition, your definition about it. And Chelsea, by the way, Chelsea says every photographer has that one card failure that changes everything.
Gosh.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
That I've experienced this both with loss of film when I was shooting film, as well as corrupt cards. It can be super stressful, for sure. But what I was going to say, Madison, is your take on failure. Are we talking about extreme, like when we say failure, are we talking about just a shortcoming in the moment where we made a mistake? Failure seems like such an extreme, very strong word. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit before we go further?
Yeah. So I think, I've always felt that, people define failure a little bit differently.
Sure.
Me being a perfectionist doesn't seem like I'm very much a perfectionist today.
No, I
but
hear
me
you, though.
Being a perfectionist, every little mistake I make, I feel like I am just failing. I feel like the world is against me and I'm horrible and why am I doing this? And I'm failing.
Wow.
And so
You're pretty hard on yourself.
I'm pretty hard on myself. but I think, I've worked so hard for this business
Mm.
and I worked so hard for my couples. And I think it's like when any little thing goes.
Uh-oh. We lost Madison again. Madison, are you there? I think we've had a pretty good record so far. We've had
Like,
kind of minimal technical issues. Madison,
okay, something.
I'm hearing you come back in. Are you still there? Oh, she was kind of in and out just a little bit. So we'll give her just a second. Maybe she can call back in. We'll try at least one more time. Sorry about the technical issues, everybody who's listening in and live streaming with us for that matter. And now I'll try to be a good host and fill the space in the meantime. Oh, here she goes. Okay. Calling back in. This is like doing live radio or something. This is super fun. All right. Let's get back to split screen view for everybody watching the live stream. And Madison's back.
we had just have a huge storm happening right now in Charleston. So I don't know if anybody else is in Charleston, but I think it just knocked our power out. So there goes the internet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I have 5G, so I think we'll be okay. I think we're good.
It's looking good, sounding good so far. So we'll just stick with that for now.
Like I don't know if that was like a little tiny tornado or what, but it just came whoosh and all of a sudden knocked the power out. So
wow. Okay.
There
Okay.
it goes.
Well, here's hoping we can make it through the rest. But you were talking about the way that you define failure and kind of the extreme nature of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because of your background, or where does that thought process come from?
I think it just comes from my personality in general. My mom's the same way. She's a teacher and she builds things like huge kitchen tables and
Oh, wow.
all the things.
Okay.
For like her little side hustle. And she's like, if one thing is messed up, she's just like nitpicky all the time. And so I think that's where I get it from as well. And she's like that to this day. And honestly, I was not like that a year and a half ago.
Okay.
But I think that as I get older, I'm still really very young. As I get older, as I have a 2.5-year-old, I think I have to be nitpicky and like constantly like what's happening, perfectionist kind of thing. So
Sure.
I think it does stem from family history and something that maybe I picked up on the way, but
as we probably all do in some form or fashion. Now, I totally understand where you're coming from. I just wanted to give a little more context to that. But you were talking, so you gave an example of one particular so-called failure, if you will, where you lost data from a memory card. Andres, who's actually listening on or watching on YouTube, he says, I remember when I accidentally formatted my card. It's such a scary experience. It totally is. That can be super nerve-wracking. But
horrible.
So we're just going to rub this in a little bit more, Madison. Give us one or two more examples of what you would kind of define as a failure that you experienced in the last year or two, just to give some context to our listeners before we talk about how you've kind of proactively stepped beyond those failures.
Yeah, so I think a lot of my failures kind of happened in the very beginning of when I was starting, which, everybody does.
Sure.
There's always going to be that client that just doesn't work out. And, you can do everything right. You can treat them the best way that you can, but in the end, they're just not happy and they're not happy with the photos. And, I think the good business owner thing to say is that it's your fault because, a lot of our educators tell us, if something's wrong, it's your fault. Or not a lot of our educators, but some of our educators say, if something bad happens, you just have to take the blame for it. It's your fault. And you just have to go with it. And so ultimately it was all my fault. I don't know what I did. But I
can very much relate to what you're describing too, because in my personal life and in my business life, I've come to realize that what I feel like is a reality, which is anytime there's a frustration on my part in an experience interacting with someone else or another organization or whatever the case, almost any time anyway, I feel like there's some, even if it's a small opportunity to have done something a little bit differently to make that interaction a little bit better. So I'm pretty hard on myself too. And I'm constantly working on improving and changing because I think there's really always opportunity to do such a thing. But I can very much relate to the angst that comes along with that thought process too. So in this case with your client who was it a particular client that you had a hard time with?
Yeah, it was a particular client that I had a very hard time with. And, like you said, I feel like I'm constantly improving. But, when I think back to a failure, this is something that really just dug on me and hurt me. And I won't get in like super deep into like the specifics of it, but it just, I delivered the gallery and they were just not happy. And I thought images were beautiful. My friends and family were those are beautiful. Those are beautiful. When they were posted on Facebook, everybody was commenting, those are beautiful. Those are beautiful. When the client was posting them on Facebook, those are so beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. But I think it honestly came down to, hey, I just want my money back. And, I don't know what that was reason for. Maybe they just didn't have any money and they just wanted their money back or whatever. I just gave it back to them because obviously things change nowadays. I know how to handle those kinds of situations.
Sure.
But, when I was starting out, I was like, oh my gosh, this person's not happy. I think you have to realize as a business owner that you're not going to make every single one of your couples 100% happy.
Sure.
Especially, not in the beginning. I think it's very much possible to do that, when you grow and when you learn and when you have things nailed down. But in the beginning, I think that when you're failing and when you're making these not necessarily failing to your end, but when you're making these mistakes over and over again, you start to realize, okay, it's not me, but it's the clients that I'm allowing into my business. And I think that we talked about this on the last Bokeh podcast episode, but nailing down the clients that you want a part of your business is so important. Yeah. And so when I made that mistake of allowing that person into my business to destroy me and to be a naysayer, and to just throw me down, slash my name, when I allowed that type of personality to come into my business, it wrecked me for a couple of months, not necessarily with business, but as a person. I think people have to realize that we are people too. And, we make mistakes and it happens. But anyway, I think that what I learned from that particular mistake was now I have it nailed down as to who I'm going to allow into my business.
Sure.
And it's nothing personal if, I choose not to. It's just, I think that they would be better off with someone else, maybe just a little bit closer to their personality. But, that's kind of how I corrected the mistake. I'm now constantly doing, I know we talked about this in the last podcast episode, but constantly doing the Zoom calls, really getting to know these people. And if, a conversation can't be carried throughout the Zoom call, I think it's probably not best that, I take them on as a couple or anything like that, just because we probably just don't have any similarities, which is totally fine. But that's kind of what I've learned from that particular mistake.
Okay. So, and I'm sure we could continue to list your so-called failures. I don't want to continue to highlight those. You've already shared a couple of practical ways that you dealt with those particular situations when it came to workflow, developing a more specific workflow for the sake of backing up your files, managing your files, backing up your files, and of course, making sure that you mitigate the possibility of losing said files. Dealing with a client experience, learning how to better filter for clients who actually match your brand and the type of service that you are attempting to offer. That's super important. You're right that like in some cases the chemistry is not there, and that is totally fine. And there's another business that can serve them, and letting them go to that is the better way to go than dealing with the potential drama that comes from bringing somebody on who's just not a good fit. So there's that piece too. Maybe this is part of these things that you just shared, or part of the answer to my next question. But I wanted to ask specifically for lessons that you've learned from these failures. You've mentioned failures. But of course, to your earlier point, the very beginning, you talked about how this can be a negative failure where we fixate on the situation and it stops there. Or we can frame that failure as an opportunity to learn, and then with that new information, be able to move on more effectively as business owners, right?
Yes.
So to that end, let's be practical about it. When it comes to failure, what are the top 3 lessons that you've learned in this kind of new adventure as a business owner when it comes to how to move beyond failure?
Yeah. So for one, the main thing is not letting failure define your entire journey. So not letting failure really dig into your business. If like, for example, a negative failure, if you take that negative failure and you let it dig into you and you stop and you're done, that obviously affects your entire journey and you don't want that. So number one thing that I've learned from these failures is don't let one failure define your entire journey. Don't let one failure define your entire business or you as a person. I think when we start a business and we start these things, I think we kind of do change as people, especially when you're starting a business at 20 years old. I think that that's something that which is when I started mine. You change as a person. What's the age? I don't even know what the age is that your brain stops
supposedly
growing.
25, I think, is where your prefrontal cortex is fully formed, which is kind of crazy. You think about the things. I mean, I got married when I was 20 actually as well.
Yeah.
So the decisions that we make sometimes in life before our brains even fully formed, it's kind of funny to think about that and a little bit disconcerting as well.
Yeah.
But keep going. I didn't want to interrupt your flow of thought.
No. But yeah, I think, you're always constantly learning, always. And, when you're young and you start a business young, and you have a family, your business kind of changes your personality, and it can be in a bad way or it can be in a good way. And for
probably a lot of
while,
that comes from the pressure too. Don't you think that this like felt responsibility of, oh, now I have to provide for my family in some way, whether it's the sole income or part of the income. I've got kids, I have a partner, like this is a big deal now. It's not just about me playing around with a camera.
Exactly. No, and it's not. So for in my situation, I am the sole provider for our family. My husband's in the military, but it definitely has changed my personality. Sure. And if I would have let those failures define me and all the other mistakes that I made, we would not be living in Charleston.
Right.
We moved to Charleston, by the way. We would not, be living in Charleston. We wouldn't, have these things. And so I think if you let your failure define your journey, you're never going to know where you're going to end up. So don't let it define you and keep going, because you just wait till you get to not to the end, because there is no end of a business owner, but just wait till you get there.
The other side of that failure.
The other side. Yes. Wait till you get to the other side, and it's going to be really great.
I love this. And by the way, this is a very mature perspective coming from somebody who's relatively young. I mean, in the context of things. So I have a lot of respect for you for that. And I think it's also important to remember, this is certainly something I need to remember, which is not only should we not let our failures define us, but we should also be careful in especially our close relationships, not to let other people's mistakes or shortcomings define them as well, right? There's a certain amount of grace that is important to consider when it comes to how we look at ourselves as business owners, but certainly the way that we engage with others. I think that's a really important lesson and a good reminder as well. So, okay, so I'm writing, I'm taking notes in case you saw me looking down or anybody's watching seems to be looking down. I've got a pen in hand. I've got a notebook here. I'm taking notes. The first thing is, don't let the failure define your business or define your journey as a business owner. I think this is super important. Take us to the next point.
Yeah, so this next point kind of stems from the first one. And that is, don't let your failure define the way you treat your friends and your family. So this is definitely something that I struggled with in the beginning. I will be the first person to say that mistakes and failure and stress of being a business owner affected my family, maybe not in a big, huge defining way, but affected personalities. When something happened, for example, when that happened with that card, I stood up. All my family was around me watching a movie, or not my family, my husband and my son were around me watching this movie, and I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? And I'm like freaking out, pacing around the living room, like, what is happening? What is happening? On the verge of like a midlife crisis.
A midlife crisis at 21.
Maybe not midlife crisis, but maybe like a full-blown panic attack, going crazy. I mean, I think anybody that has happened to, it's just crazy. Yeah. So, I'm pacing around, like, just like, oh my gosh. And, my son's crying because he's like, what's happening? Why is she screaming? what's happening? Chaos in the house. And so I think that's just kind of a small way to say maybe I should have walked upstairs, shut the door, and now that's what I do. If something happens to where, I've done something, and for example, when I was first starting out, I had accidentally double booked a client for one day. It was just an engagement session, but I had double booked it on accident. Then it was after all that had happened a few months later down the road. But I walked upstairs, shut the door, and I was like, okay, how shall I fix this? And I, contacted the client. I said, hey, I made this mistake. And I think that's the thing. When you make a mistake like that, just be honest. Don't try to beat the bush around the mistake. I called the client. I said, I made a mistake. I accidentally double booked you with another client for this day. And she was, oh, fine. That's no big deal. We just did it the next day and it was totally fine. But I think, as a business owner, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to ruin me. Like, business owners don't make mistakes. Photographers don't make mistakes. My educators, they never make mistakes. Wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. Yeah. And I think when you realize that, and it's not often that people are going to say, oh, I did this, or I did this. And so it's not often that you hear that people make mistakes, but I think that you have to understand that it happens. So maybe not letting that affect your friends and your family or your marriage, and just kind of separating that business and state in those kind of situations.
State. Emotional state, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just kind of, you're a business owner and sometimes you have to keep that separate. So you have to say, okay, I've made this mistake. Don't take it out on your family. Don't take it out on your husband. Let's figure this out as a business owner. If you need to contact another business owner, do it. Do whatever you got to do, but don't let it affect your friends and your family at all.
That's it's a great reminder. Both these concepts are not earth-shattering or super complicated, but they're important points that are easy to forget in the moment, right?
Yes.
We're stressed. I mean, I think a lot of photographers, based on my experience about 20 years in the industry now, a lot of photographers, including myself, by the way, are pretty emotional people, right? So in the moment, as you pointed out, first of all, it's easy to make a way bigger deal of an individual incident than we actually need to, because in the scheme of things, it's actually not that big of a deal. Or to your second point, in the moment, because we're emotional creatures, we respond in anger or in angst, and we let that, as you said, affect the relationships with those around us. And it's so disconcerting. Even now, if I let this happen in my own life, I'm pretty embarrassed, frankly, after the fact. And so just keeping that front of mind, and being highly self-aware when it comes to dealing with that particular situation and how we are then behaving as a result. I think a lot of people, especially in our culture in 2021, the conversation, at least in American culture, is such that we allow our feelings to define who we are, which is a really massive mistake because it interferes with reality, right? There's feelings which are certainly felt in a real way, but then there's the reality of how those feelings translate to our behavior, which actually affects the world around us. And so we need to make sure not to allow the feelings to drive us to behave in such a way, especially in the context of your current point, where it affects our relationships negatively. It's a really great reminder. So we've got, first of all, don't let failures define our journey and our business, our journey as a business owner. We should also not allow those failures to interfere with or affect ultimately negatively our relationships with those around us, those that are closest to us.
Right.
What's that third lesson?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this in the previous point, but whenever you make a mistake, stop everything that you're doing and immediately try to correct the mistake. Don't sit and avoid the mistake because it will get worse. It will not get any better. For example, if I would have, let's say I double booked that client, and if I would have not called her and said, hey, this is the mistake that I made. Can we please do this another day? I'm so sorry. If I would have just said, oh, maybe she'll get sick or not sick. Maybe they can't come that day. We'll just see what happens. No, that's not going to work. You have to fix and correct what you did. And you have to be honest. If you're the one that made the mistake, you have to correct it. You have to fix it. You have to be honest about it. And if you're not honest and you don't fix it, it will make your life a living hell. I promise.
Yeah.
You need to fix your mistake.
We can't stick our head in the sand and expect it to go away, right?
Exactly.
I've been
No,
guilty of that
yeah.
for sure. We have to.
I
It's
know.
in the moment. Again, being emotional people, it's easy to just kind of cower in fear,
Yeah.
or to be like, oh, not dealing with that now. I'm going to push that aside.
Exactly.
And the reality is, it doesn't go away. We do have to face it head
Yeah.
on. And again, it's a simplistic notion, but I know that as photography business owners, many of us anyway, are quite guilty of that. So it's a good reminder. And being proactive, facing that thing head on, dealing with it, knowing that probably in many cases, if not most cases, it's probably not even as bad as we were talking about, as we're making it out to be. And if we just face it and we address it honestly, and I am glad that you highlight the significance of that honest conversation, not only that we're having with our client, but also with ourselves, right? That we're dealing with it head on. Then on the other side of that, again, is going to be a pretty big sense of relief. We're going to be able to move on, continue to build our business. Back to the earlier point that you were making too about creating boundaries with regards to client. Chelsea, I'll pop this up on screen for everybody who's watching the live stream. And she says, I feel this so much, Madison. Boundaries are so important. I just had that happen from a client I booked years ago, but finally got to shoot recently. Looking back, I probably wouldn't have booked that client knowing what I do now. But in the beginning, you're just happy that anyone would trust you. And it's true.
Yeah.
But then in some cases we learn, and maybe the hard way, as was discussed, that we need to put some type of a filter in place. And as long as we have clarity as far as our brand is concerned, then it will enable us to do just that. So, by the way, Chelsea and Andres, I appreciate your comments today. And for anybody else who might be watching or listening,
thank you.
Take advantage of these live streams. Comment, ask questions. Love the engagement. We have just a few minutes left, though, Madison. And I want to jump to one more question, because leading up to our conversation today, not only did you mention the significance of your experience with failure and how you've been able to ultimately step beyond that, right? Not let that bog you down completely. One of the other things that you mentioned were that there were some people, it sounds like, that had tried to kind of ruin or defeat you, to ultimately be naysayers. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think, before I tell you what happened, because it's horrible. In life, there are going to always be people who are not going to cheer you on. Whether you are a photographer, business owner, just in general, there are always going to be people who, just are not on your side. I think we all witnessed that a little bit in the business journey.
Sure.
All business owners have clients that just have nothing better to do than this, or not clients necessarily, but people that have nothing better to do than to try and ruin you, no matter how good of a job you had and how well you take care of them. Just like happened, I was talking about in the previous question where you asked, a particular mistake or something that had affected you in my business. But this is definitely something that happened to me that I think I turned it into a very positive failure. And this is why I'm on the podcast episode today. So if you were wondering why I wanted to talk about all my failures, this is why. So I would say probably about 2 months ago, there was someone who made a fake Instagram account, and a couple people, or a person who made several Instagram accounts, that completely just ripped me a new one. On all of my Instagram posts, they probably commented on every single post that I had on Instagram over and over and over again. So probably spent all day doing this, bless their hearts. They are on all my Facebook posts, all my Instagram posts saying, this is horrible. I can't even believe you're a photographer. What are you doing with your life? Blah, 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 blah. Constantly over and over and over again. I don't know who this was. I don't even know how they found me, but they were completely attacking me. And when that was happening, it all kind of happened within like an hour span. I was on the way to an engagement session, one that which I'm excited about, all of them, but one that I was very excited about. My couple had a very high expectation of me. It was something that they were so excited about for months and months and months on end. And I, originally, a year ago, that would have completely like wiped me out. I wouldn't even been able to do my best on my engagement session, just because I kind of back then I would have taken those comments seriously. But now, obviously I knew what was happening, but that was something that actually really hurt me. Something that I was like, why would anybody do this to me? Being like a perfectionist, I'm like, you think my pictures are horrible? What? Like, obviously it only matters, what you think. But it just really tore me apart. But I decided to take that and say, you know what? I'm going to message Nathan and I'm going to say, hey, I want to be on Bokeh Podcast episode again. And I want to talk about failure. And I want to talk about how I took these situations and how you all can take these situations and turn them into something completely different. That ended up being one of my favorite engagement sessions of my entire career.
Really?
And the couple, they just rave every day to me about their images. And so I think when you turn your mindset and you say, okay, this person thinks my pictures are horrible. Well, watch this, like here's some more photos that you can see.
Yeah.
Now, obviously I like blocked those Instagram accounts. Didn't like private message them or anything, but
Sure.
that would be ridiculous. But I, even though I wanted to, I, just took that and I moved forward and I turned it into something that was really, really great. And did amazing on that engagement session and just grew this new confidence in myself that is, staying with me to this day. I think that I know it seems kind of like a small thing, but it's something that really turned me around. And now I walk into a wedding day and I walk into an engagement session. This was before, so May has been my busiest month of my entire career.
Wow.
And I knew that I had to have a certain mindset for this month. And so that was like it sounds weird, but that was like the most perfect thing that could have happened to me right before this huge life-changing month in my career. And so I think when you take something like that and you turn it around, you just have no idea what it's going to do for you, because it definitely woke me up with this brand new confidence, like walking into every shoe. I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. If I make a tiny mistake, don't fester over it, fix it and move forward. So that's just something that happened to me and something that, it brought me here.
Well, and I appreciate your willingness to come to have this conversation. Again, you're super gracious. I was saying this even when you had to hang up earlier and log back in. We were having those technical issues. I was just saying how gracious you were to be willing to come on the show and open up and share. And again, what we're talking about here aren't super complicated concepts. It's the significance is the reminder from somebody who is relatively new to the business, has just faced this in a very fresh way, and certainly recently, and that the fact that you're willing to share from those experiences, not only the experience itself, but then what you learned from it, how you've been able to move on from it, I think is really great. When I listen to you describe how you moved beyond that situation, it seems like it started maybe number one with perspective, right? So if you realize, you put in context these comments, that renewed or changed perspective, it enables you not only to look at that differently, but to move on. And then you used those criticisms and this ridiculous behavior to fuel an even higher energy that you were throwing into your business. So you're like, you know what? Watch
this.
Which is pretty brilliant. Would you say that, are there any other particular practical takeaways from that experience that you would recommend to our listeners? Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah. So, I think another thing I would say is, like I said earlier, there's going to be people that are going to try to tear you down, random people that you don't even know. They don't even have any business being in your business. Yeah. But I think, you are as good as you are. And, it would be easy for me to look at those comments and say, oh my gosh, like, for example, one of the comments was, if you do this in editing, maybe that'll change some things. You know what? I actually read that comment and went back, fixed that in editing, and it kind of made the image look better. And so,
you learned from it. Yeah.
It's
all how we frame it, right?
Exactly. So I think if maybe you would have taken those older comments and said, well, those comments were just downright hateful and awful, and nobody deserves to hear that. But there was some comments that was like, oh, well, okay. I think maybe if you get too defensive and you say,
yes,
oh, they don't know what they're talking about, like, I'm perfect, whatever. You have to really humble yourself in this business, and you have to understand, everybody's style is different. But in that certain circumstance, they were right, and I went and changed that, and it fixed everything. And so, I think sometimes you listen and sometimes you don't. You really just have to be able to differentiate
Sure.
which way you need to go.
Yep.
But I think if somebody's just being downright hateful to you, you don't have any business listening to that, and you don't need to listen to that. So
No,
just
I
move
mean,
forward and
yeah, at that point, they're not there to help you.
no.
They're compensating for some insecurity or issue in
Hmm.
their life, and it's pretty obvious. So yeah, perspective matters
Hmm.
quite significantly in
Yeah.
this conversation, in the context, this particular scenario in
Hmm.
particular. One area, just one last thing here
Yeah.
before we finish up. I
Yeah.
know we have just a few minutes left, and I kind of want to push back a little bit. I'm curious to get your
Hmm.
take. You said that ultimately we determine how good we are or how good our work
Hmm.
is. Where do you think that line, or we cross that from that line into maybe the significance of our client's perception? Because, I think back to like watching, did you ever watch American Idol? The show American Idol?
Yes.
Okay. Or even any comparable reality TV shows where there's a judge
Uh-huh.
involved and the judge is telling them they like them or don't like them, right?
Yeah.
And to this day, it still cracks me up thinking about the responses of some of the artists in the moment who are like,
Hmm.
I don't care what you who have
Yeah.
30 years in production in the music industry think about me. I think I'm great. And
Yeah.
there's a certain level of ignorance there, I think, or naivety and ego. You're talking, I mean, you
Hmm.
referred to this idea of ego that we have to set aside for the
Hmm.
sake of keeping an open mind when we're getting
Yeah.
feedback. But I think that is also important to keep in mind when it comes to how we see our work. Where for you do you think is the balance between a certain level of self-confidence, certainly, but also
Hmm.
acknowledging that at the end of the day, what really actually matters is the client's experience or the
Hmm.
client's perception of our work, the people that we're
Yes.
actually serving?
Yeah, so this is so hard to really kind of separate. And something that I've always struggled with, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. It's okay. Your client doesn't like this photo. Your client doesn't like this photo, but you love it. You love it. This isn't something that I really get a lot of the time now,
Okay.
as my style's been defined. But I think starting out as a photographer, there has been a case where it's like, oh, I don't really like this photo, but you're like, what? Like that was so good, that was so good, but they don't like it. And I think it maybe come down to maybe that's what they weren't expecting. And I think beginning as a photographer, you're still nailing down the style. You're still nailing down. You're still learning how to shoot properly. And so I think it's okay if that happens because
Hmm.
they may not just been right for you, and or you may just not have been right for them. Vice versa, either way. So I think it's so hard to kind of answer that question because it's
Yeah.
like,
I know there's not an absolute answer to the question. I think at the
yeah,
very least, I wanted to highlight the significance, though, of
mm-hmm,
making sure that we do keep in mind our client's perspective, because
yes,
photographers, a lot of times, and I'm sure I've been guilty of it as well,
mm-hmm,
we kind of get caught up in what we think is the best or
yeah,
is right in the moment.
yeah,
And I think it does require a certain amount of confidence to be. A lot of people refer to photography as, or categorize ourselves as artists. So if we're going to do that as a so-called artist, we have to have a certain amount of
mm-hmm,
confidence if we're going to create a brand in a particular style and put that out in the world and represent that consistently.
yeah,
There's got to be a certain amount of confidence there. But I think at the end of the day,
yes,
it is, I mean, we don't have a business unless
yeah,
we are able to have the opportunity to serve a
mm-hmm,
client. And if the client's not happy with the end product, no amount of
yes,
confidence in
no,
whatever it is that we're offering is going to change the fact that they're not going
no,
to pay money for
absolutely
that.
not.
Right. So
No,
there's,
absolutely not.
go ahead.
So I think that um, this is something that I have done to avoid the fact that. So I think in the beginning, you're nailing down your style. You're doing all these things, and you're right. At the end of the day, it matters what the client loves, but I think it also matters how you choose which clients you choose. And so
I like that.
this is how I kind of avoid having clients that are expecting something different.
Yeah.
And so if the client's expecting something different, then they're
Oh, we lost Madison again. For anybody who's been watching the live stream or maybe noticed it in the audio, we've had kind of a weak connection. If you missed it earlier in the show, apparently they lost power. They were having a big storm there in the Charleston area, and it looks like we lost her altogether. I'm not sure if we lost power. The battery ran out on the phone. She was actually using her phone for the live stream. I'll give her a second to call back in. In the meantime, I think we've very well summed up the conversation here. I mean, especially as it relates to failures. Madison's so gracious and generous to be willing to share where maybe she tripped up a little bit, but yet learned from that experience and moved on, built a stronger business as a result. I think that's really the big takeaway from the day. And then as well, if we have naysayers in the process of running a business, super important, number one, to maintain a perspective about who is commenting and whether or not we should give credence or significance to those comments, to that perspective. But then also keep an open mind to the possibility that there might be constructive criticism there that we can learn from. That enables us, again, to further grow from that experience. And I think that's super important as well. It looks like we may have lost Madison, so we're going to go ahead today and sign off for the time being. For those of you who are watching, make sure, or listening, make sure that you go, and I'm going to pop this up on the screen, that you go to Instagram.com/photography by Madison Banks. Photography Madison Banks. Instagram.com photography Madison Banks. I think I added the by earlier in the Madison Banks. And then it's madisonbanksphoto.com. Let me make sure that you all go to not only your site, check out her work. It's beautiful, beautiful design. We talked about her new website design earlier, but also make sure that you follow Madison. Again, photography, forgive me if I put by in there earlier, photography Madison Banks on Instagram. We'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for listening to not only or watching the live stream, but those of you who are listening to audio. Just a quick reminder again, make sure that you follow us on Instagram at Bokeh Podcast, Bokeh Podcast. Keep up to date with the next live stream so you can come hang out with us, ask questions, make comments as you may have seen or heard done today. Love the engagement. We want it to be a group conversation, if you will. There's opportunity to ask the guests questions about the topic that we're addressing. And I think that's really cool too. Let's make it a group conversation. Let's make it a community conversation. Come hang out with us. Follow us at bokehpodcast.com. I'll pop this up on the screen, Bokeh podcast. Well, you can go to bokehpodcast.com, but Bokeh Podcast on Instagram as well. Follow us there. Would love to have you next time. All right, everybody, thank you so much. I hope you have an absolutely brilliant day, and we'll talk to you more soon. Bye-bye.